Our next speaker is Alistair McConnachie. Alistair works in the UK with James Gibbs Stewart. They're the leading reform movement, I'm going to call them, in the UK, although that may not be quite the way to describe it. They hold an annual monetary reform conference every year, in Birmingham, England, or near Birmingham, England. It's called the Bromsgrove Conference. This year is going to be the 12th annual. They've been doing this for 12 years. They have some experience in this, and they get together some of the most advanced people in monetary reform in the country, and people from around the world go there also. I've been there twice, and it's always an enjoyable experience. Alistair has been getting his degree in law recently, and he, the one thing I was pointing out, he's the only other person I found, besides myself, who understood, after reading the Lincoln quotes on the readbacks, he understood that they were not real. And to me, that kind of judgment is rather outstanding, to be able to figure that out, and he did. And I asked him yesterday how he managed to figure that out, and it was exactly the same reason that I had. He said they were too good to be true, and it's accurate. So let's welcome Alistair McConnachie.
I am going to bring you some greetings from money reformers in Britain. Then for 5 minutes or so, I want to tell you what we've been doing in the United Kingdom, and then in the remaining 15 minutes or so, I want to give you my presentation, as it were, my actual talk, what I've come here to tell you about. And what that is going to be is what I and money reformers in Britain consider to be the appropriate money reform response to the present financial crisis. And you'll not be surprised to hear that it's heavily based upon the AMI reforms. That's my mentor, James Gibbs Stewart. He was here in 2006 and in 2007. I was very privileged to be here in 2005, and it's a great honor and a privilege to be here, not only addressing the American Monetary Institute, but in this great American city. I came out of my hotel this morning, the sun was shining, it was over 70 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't get that in Scotland, ever. So it's just amazing to see blue skies instead of grey clouds and drizzle and damp. Anyway, Scotland's not too bad if you like wetness. So yes, James can't be here, but he has asked me to give you this message. My sincerest best wishes to you as you gather at this critical time. It is my hope, and I trust also the hope of everyone at this conference, that the urgent and necessary reforms so conscientiously promoted by Stephen Zarlenga and the AMI team will shortly find a very wide audience throughout North America and the world, because I believe it is no exaggeration to say that it is the publicly created money reform championed by this conference which represents nothing less than the hope of the world, and which points the way to a sane, democratic and sound economy for us all. Now, some of you will remember Ron Rankin. He was here in 2006 with his wife Gloria. Ron is a stalwart of the British monetary reform movement. That's Gloria with Stephen last year at the Bromsgrove Conference. And Ron says, our heartiest congratulations to Stephen Zarlenga and Jamie Walton and the staff of the AMI for putting together this fourth conference. What we are witnessing now is a real opportunity, a real moment of truth. We've never had a better chance in the recent past. The time has now come, and the voices that we have here assembled over these 4 days need to be heard. Our very best wishes. Now, for the next few minutes, let me bring you up to date with what we've been doing in the United Kingdom. As some of you know, I publish, with the help of James Gibbs Stewart, this newsletter called Prosperity. It's now at issue 81. It's a 4-page newsletter, and it's been going since January 2000. And I also organise the Bromsgrove Conference, which is the premier money reform movement, money reform conference in Western Europe anyway. Now, last year at the Bromsgrove Conference, Stephen spoke, gave a couple of very well-received presentations, and I was also very privileged to interview Stephen for several hours in the car from James's house down to Bromsgrove. And earlier this year I transcribed the interview. It's 6,500 words of, well, absolute wisdom really, monetary reform wisdom. It comes highly recommended. I've brought a lot of copies with me. I'll sit them at the back. And all I'm asking is a donation of $1, something like that. But the content is worth thousands of dollars. What we've also been doing is, well, about a couple of years ago, a year after I was first here, we put together this money reform manual called Clarifying Our Monetary Reform Proposals. And it's 40 pages. And what we do is we look at the two main money reforms which are on the table. What I call the Rowbotham reform, which he detailed in his book, The Grip of Death, and the Robertson-Zarlenga reform, the reform promoted by James Robertson in his book, Creating New Money, which is also the same as the reform promoted by the American Monetary Institute. I've only brought 10 copies with me, but what we do is we look at the reforms, we explain how they work, we answer the frequently asked questions, and we address the objections, and it's all there in 40 very short, concise, easy to understand pages. I've only got 10 copies with me, and I can ask for $20 for that, thanks. Now, we've also established a charity. This year, it's been 5 years in the making. It's named after the grandfather of British monetary reform, which is James Gibbs Stewart. It's called the James Gibbs Stewart Trust. And it's a legally constituted charity with monetary reform objectives within an overall economic objective. And in order to get charitable status, of course, it has to have an educational aim, and I won't read that out to you, but those are the aims that we're going to, these are the objects within which we will be trying to develop our activity. The long-term aim is that this charity will be a vehicle to generate an income which will allow us, for example, to commission research, to fund student bursaries, to pay expenses for money reformers to come to conferences like this one, and to promote campaigns generally, all of course within the legally constituted charitable objects. The other thing that we're doing in the United Kingdom at the moment is we're trying to establish what's called a Royal Commission investigation. Now, a Royal Commission is a bit like a congressional hearing. The government will delegate a body to investigate a particular area of public concern. We'd like to see a Royal Commission investigation into the banking system. There was one about 30 years ago. Now is the most opportune time for one. And we're going to be launching that campaign at the Bromsgrove Conference. Now, what I'm just trying to say there, I rushed through that, but we're trying to position ourselves as best as we can to take advantage of the situation which is going down and to promote our positive message of money reform as best as we can. Which brings me into the meat and potatoes of my talk, which will take me about 17 or 18 minutes. Yeah. I'm very strong on keeping to time. I don't like to cut into anybody else's time.
It's all right.
Yeah. Now, before I talk to you about these positive reforms, what I want to do is to explain the term that we use, which is publicly created money. That's the sort of money that the American Monetary Institute wants to see created. We call it publicly created money, which we think is a better term, better phraseology, better rhetoric than government-created money or state-created money. publicly created money is a term that we use to describe debt-free money spent, not lent, into existence by an agency of the state. And that stands in rhetorical opposition to privately created money, which is debt-based money created by the private banking system. So when you hear me talk about publicly created money, I'm talking about the debt-free money created by a department of the state. Now, the title of my talk, I always like to have a title that sort of summarizes what I'm going to be talking about. And sometimes I like to be a little bit clever with my titles, and sometimes perhaps in this one I've been a little too clever. Inoculating against finance fever. And I've got a subtitle to that. And I was thinking, how do you explain that best in the present circumstances? Now, we're hearing about this bailout, the 700 billion bailout, which is going to Wall Street. And I'm thinking, that's going up to the top, it's going to the corporate elite, it's going to the financial elite. It's not coming down to Main Street. It's not coming down to small-time America. It's not coming down to the men and women of this nation. So how can I kind of position Wall Street against Main Street? And I should have just said something like Main Street. But I played on the word Wall Street, and I thought, Wallissa, Alaska. That's Sarah Palin. And I'm thinking, and I don't want to get into the presidential debates, although we do take a lot of interest in the presidential debates in the United Kingdom, probably as much interest as the Americans, because we need to know who our Prime Minister is going to be taking orders from. So, yes, back to Wallissa, Alaska. So I thought, inoculating against finance fever, injecting debt-free money into Wallissa, not Wall Street. However, and I should tell you this because maybe one or two of you know, or you're going to come back to me on it, I was on the plane yesterday, I was reading a newspaper report, and it says Sarah Palin is from Wasilla, Alaska. Well, it's such a small town that nobody actually knows if it's Wasilla or Wallissa, but for the sake of this we'll call it Wallissa. But the name is really intended to say, into small town USA is where we put the money, not into financial markets USA, for want of a better term. Now, I have copies of this speech, copies enough for everybody, and I'll leave them at the back, and they're free, and so just take it out. So everything that I'm going to say will be here. In fact, probably more will be in here than what I'm actually going to say. That is to say, the appropriate money reform response to this financial crisis is to inject debt-free money into the grassroots of America. It's not to bail out Wall Street at the top. If there's money needing to go into the system, then let's invest in America at the grassroots. Let's create the wealth at the grassroots. Let's not prop up a failed system. Let's not prolong the agony. This is the proposition to which the next few minutes is dedicated. It is this idea of investing in Main Street that I want to impress upon you as the appropriate money reform response to the present crisis. But let's backtrack a little. What's at the root of the problem? Michael Rowbotham said it very well in his book, The Grip of Death. The fundamental reason why financial markets do not function according to theory, which explains why these markets have turned into gambling shops in which everything is given a value and traded mercilessly for gain, is that the whole edifice is erected upon the instability and opportunism of debt. That is, since banks create debt-based money out of nothing, then if they are allowed, then their reckless lending will fuel the financial markets. And this is especially so when they are allowed to engage in speculation. Debt is to the financial markets I like to say, as high-octane fuel is to a jet engine. That is, it propels it off at speed. House prices, for example, shoot along the runway and then they take off. But this isn't jet-propelled speed, it's debt-propelled speed. Debt-propelled flight, which is putting the housing markets right up there. And it's this creation of money for speculative purposes which is causing the damage to the financial markets at the moment. Michael Robotham again said in one of his pamphlets, in reference to lending specifically for speculation, he said, these are financial activities at least one step removed from actual productive investment, and little of the money involved actually filters through to commerce. There are also activities which, though not wholly undesirable, certainly do not merit the right to leverage volumes of additional money into existence if they are to take place. There is a compelling case for arguing that, if they are to take place, there is a compelling case for arguing that this should only be with money that the agents actually possess, i.e. money already in existence, not additional bank credit. And what this is also saying is that we need to reimpose something like the Glass-Steagall Act, which was abolished by the Clinton administration. And this act prohibited commercial banks from getting involved in investment banking and from the speculation involved in that field. So that's to say the first response to the banking crisis is we need to prevent commercial banks from being able to lend money for and to trade in derivatives. Prevent them from being able to lend money for and trade in derivatives such as collateralized debt obligations and mortgage-backed securities. We need to separate commercial banking from investment banking. So that means that the speculators, if they're still speculating, will need to do so with money that actually exists. Real money, not money that they've been able to borrow specifically for the purposes of speculation. And if they were only speculating with real money that they actually had, then there is the possibility, it could be argued, that that would allow currency markets to return to their proper function, which is evening out trade-related imbalances. Now, of course, we should go further, as the American Monetary Institute would advocate, and that is we should prevent banks from being able to create money out of nothing in the first place. So not only should banks be prohibited from getting involved in speculation, but they should be prohibited from creating money out of nothing. And if they have to lend money to anyone, then it will have to be real money which they already have. Of course, there are also just some small basic banking reforms, which is just traditional banking sensibilities which need to be brought back in. And before I just briefly go through these policies, I want to talk about the two principles which should ground our approach to the banking system. And the first is that banks are creatures of our law. We have the right and we have the duty to regulate and supervise them and to ensure that they are accountable to the society upon which their actions impact. And if the government has to take on these toxic assets, and we would advocate that they shouldn't, but if they have to take on these toxic assets, then they should make very clear ground rules for the banking system and say, we'll take them on, but you're going to have to change your ways, and these are the policies that you're going to have to bring in. And principle 2 is that overall we're downsizing the financial sector and we're trying to get back to a productive economy again, an economy that actually creates things so that all the very intelligent people, all the rocket scientists who are in Wall Street and in the City of London will have to get proper jobs, and the rocket scientists can go and they can create rockets. And when we have this productive economy again, then we'll be able to generate levels of income which will mean we won't have to obtain so much of our money by borrowing, and debt will become a choice, like it used to be not a necessity. Two policies for banking reform. Policy 1, rein in easy credit. Lend like we used to do in the 1970s. That's to say, bring down the income borrowing ratio, no 150% mortgages, establish controls which place limits on the duration of a mortgage, and raise the initial deposit required from the borrower. These are just basic banking things, basic banking sense, which tends to have been abandoned in our debt-based economy. Policy 2, regulate and inspect financial instruments properly. An instrument such as a collateralized debt obligation. Just as we regulate for the health and security of the nation, we can regulate for the health and security of the economy. Especially when the consequences of trading in these speculative instruments are impacting so negatively upon our society. And in any case, as I said earlier, banks should be prohibited from lending for them and trading in them. And the instruments themselves, to the extent that they are comprehensible, need to be looked at, and if they're not transparent, if nobody really knows how they work, if you can't really follow the money, then they shouldn't be allowed to trade in them. Banks, investment banks, all these things are creatures of our law. And the big one, of course, move to a publicly created money supply as advocated by the American Monetary Institute. Which brings me back to where we started and the situation right now. If the economy needs liquidity, and if we're going to pump money in, then let's make sure, as I said at the start of my talk, that it goes to the people at the grassroots, not to the gamblers at the top. Let the new money, created by a fourth branch of government, as advocated by the AMI, be invested into society, and let it find its way trickling upwards to the banking system via new savings deposits, put there by the men and women who create the wealth of this nation, the real wealth of this nation. That's to say, to secure the long-term sustainable prosperity of the country, and indeed the long-term health of the banks themselves. Then let's invest money directly into society so that the wealth created will find its way into banks eventually. If you put it in at the top, if you simply allow banks to continue to do what they're doing, they're going to continue this debt bubble, which will do nothing but continue to create more bad debts for everybody. It will continue to drive up the cost of living for the American household, who will themselves continue to be income-starved and debt-laden. So invest in the real economy, not the global casino. Don't reward the gamblers for their failures by bailing them out. Don't dump their rotting assets on the taxpayer. Spend, not lend. Publicly created, debt-free money on projects in the real economy which will represent sustainable investment in the future of America and generate the real wealth that the country needs. That's exactly the sort of infrastructural investment which the AMI has been advocating so resolutely all these years, and that's exactly the sort of infrastructural investment to which this conference is dedicated. So, to conclude, the life support remedy of publicly created money needs to be injected into the hearts and the muscles of the people, not into the pockets of the gamblers on Wall Street who are responsible. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you the very best wishes for this conference and for the future of the American monetary reform movement from we money reformers in Britain. My talk's available at the back, as I say, and thank you very much for listening.